got my notes, so I'm going to share a quick story to help explain how story and song evolved into education, and which relates to our ancestors for millions of years who had to study bird calls and animal language and the sounds of the earth and the patterns that those create, and why singing and melody has such an impact on a child's mind and an adult's mind, and why we can remember things so much more readily when we sing them. Okay, so I told my first graders this story about two friends, A.E. and P-Tip, and as soon as you say those names, the kids are immediately curious because they're very weird names. And I won't tell the whole story, but when they grew up together, P-Tip was a singer, and he used to sing like this. And you do that, and then you've got their attention even more, and they're laughing and giggling and stuff. And A.E. and P-Tip grew up together, and then at one point, as they were becoming young men, A.E. takes this job teaching kids on like a whole nother continent, and they go on this long journey. It's kind of like a goodbye trip, and they go up into the mountains, and where they encounter a dragon, which they had kind of known about since childhood. And you know, long kind of story, and the result is that P-Tip gets injured, and even, you know, fairly badly, and specifically to his face and his lips, and A, you know, nurses him back to health and saves his life. But then finally he gets P-Tip down, and he goes to the hospital and blah blah blah, and A, you know, has to say goodbye, and he goes, and so he goes, you know, a whole nother continent, and P-Tip finally recovers, but he can't sing anymore because he can no longer, you know, go. So he's depressed for a long time, and then finally he learns to sing again, and then he gets his old job back at the radio station and blah blah blah, and he sings in a whole different and new way, and finally, you know, and I'm telling this story to first graders and kindergarteners, you know, so, and A, on this other continent, for the first time, hears this song that becomes, you know, one of the most popular songs in the world, and P-Tip becomes famous, and A hears it for the first time, and the song goes like this: A-E-I-O-U, 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 A-E-I-O-U. And of course A is like touched, you know, he hears the song and he's crying, and you know, and he says to himself, and he writes back to his friend, "Oh, you don't owe me anything, you know, I always loved you," and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and more or less that's the end of the story. And, you know, of course, any children can hear that story and just like the story of it. But my first graders, because we were, you know, at the time studying the letters, and I wanted to differentiate the vowels and the consonants, and so, bam, you know, I told that story, and then of course they're immediately singing it, and, you know, in the subsequent days, you know, all I had to do was kind of go, and, you know, and then, you know, 20 seconds later, one or two of them are singing that, and when I want to bring up the vowels, of course, in class, and we're specifically studying something, you know, they go, A-E-I-O-U, A-E-I-O, you know, and they're all excited about it. But then, so, and one last thing, it's not just like the ABC song, it's not just a way to memorize something, but what it does is it creates, for like a new subject, the way our brain works, it creates like an anchor, whoop, right there in the brain, and then you can attach all the different, you know, concepts and things to it, so that when I'm in class, you know, all I have to do is go, A-E-I-O-U, you know, and then it's like I'm right in their brains at that point where they're like, right, vowels, they remember the story, they remember that there's these other things that aren't vowels that are called consonants, and, you know, and all the other things that we've talked about. And so it's like this way to like just dial in really quickly. So anyways, the power of song and story, and how our evolutionary background leads into education. Good luck!